Hey all, welcome to another video, and today I'll share a little bit about my latest update to my repository node typescript crud nodes. Now that every time I say that, I feel like I should give that repository a better name because it has clearly evolved from a NodeJS Express API REST API built with TypeScript for a note taking app. It has evolved, so you can now take notes. You can store to do. You can also do save users, and I'll be adding more things to it. It's also got API endpoints for fetching the latest weather and getting jokes. Um, the jokes are, I mean, you would get a Chuck Norris joke, and very soon I'll be adding things like Yelp, and also this feature for to be able to add orders, like for users to place orders on an order, a REST API for managing orders. So for a user to be able to place orders for say shop, like for a purchase order or something. Um, why am I talking about the order part? It's because when I shared my um, latest changes on social media, by that I mean on LinkedIn, somebody commented that would it be able to take orders, like can this API do order management? And I'm like, that's not a bad idea. I could potentially add that. But anyway, we're skipping ahead a little bit. So let's backtrack, and I'll talk about my latest update to the repository. So I've actually created a new branch called test. I can't remember. Oh yeah, it's called test coverage. So this branch is about increasing the test coverage of this API. So at this point, the test coverage is really low, and by test coverage, I mean unit test coverage. So uh, it's um, it can execute unit tests using Jest. So at the moment, what I've been doing in the last 2 days is that I have been adding, I've been pushing updates to my branch test coverage, and I haven't merged that to master yet. But I've been adding my changes to, I've been pushing changes to it, and what that means is it uh, basically, so it's got like three controllers right now. One is the user controller, the nodes controller, and the to do controller. So I am writing unit tests for all those functions, for the functions in those controllers that are related to an endpoint. So for example, say crud to do, crud nodes, crud user, or search to do by user, search nodes by user, get user by email, so on and so forth. So I'm just writing all these tests to basically unit tests to test those scenarios. And while I have been doing this, I found quite a few little flaws in my code that I couldn't see before, because uh, I had not really adopted TDD when I was building out this repository. So that's why I couldn't see some of them. I'll give you an example. For example, like I did not have guard statements in it. So you understand guard statements? Okay, in case you don't understand guard statements, I only know about guard statements because of my work with iOS Swift, because Swift has these guard statements. So instead of how for when you receive a HTTP request in a backend in a REST API, uh, you would actually check, you try to validate that request. So you'd have like an if condition that would say, okay, if so and so is there. For example, say you've got a query ID. So say if request.query.id exists, yes, no. If it doesn't exist, then throw an error. If it exists, then continue processing. So a guard statements are when you start executing the code, when you start executing your function, you first check for the condition. First check for the necessary parameters, whether or not they present, whether or not the request has all the information that you need. Let me rephrase that. Let me backtrack and rephrase it. So when you receive a request and as you start processing the request, the first thing that you want to do is to validate whether or not that request has all the information that the method needs for it to fulfill that request. For example, if an ID is a mandatory parameter, does it exist? Yes, no. If it doesn't exist, then that's it. Like check the if statement and then see if it use an if statement to check that. If it doesn't exist, then just exit early. Don't do any of the rest of the processing. It just terminate early. If it's not there, terminate early. That's the idea for a guard statement. So instead of having like if else, if else, if else, the if else, the conditional hell or whatever you call it, have a have means in your code should have you should have some your code should have the logic to exit early instead of doing the rest of the processing. So that's a guard statement. So in the unit tests that I've been writing, I've mostly been checking the guard statements, and I found out that in my original code prior to me working on this repository, I did not have good enough guard statements. Like if it was doing like if it's not present, response.send error, and that's it. I wouldn't do anything after that. So for example, say it would be something like if request.params.id doesn't exist, response.status equals 400, and then response.send invalid request. But after that, I wouldn't have the return statements. Now, these are some of the things that I realized that this code needed to have as I was working on my test coverage branch. This is why unit testing and TDD is fantastic, because it just reduces the chance of error early on in the development. It's fantastic. I couldn't vouch more for it. So please, if you're working on any of your code in the future, try to adopt TDD. That way you minimize heaps of errors very early on in your code. So yeah, I've been making changes. The test coverage branch now has all the tests for the to-do controller and most of them for user controller. So I'll be working to update this, and once I've increased the coverage on at least all the controllers that are there in my repository, I'll create a pull request and I'll merge that in. So that's pretty much all, and yeah, happy Easter. This is one of the ways in which I'm spending my Easter. So yeah, I hope you're all having a fantastic Easter too. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say in this video, and I'm happy that I'm not over 10 minutes yet. So alright, so I'll put a link to my repository in the description of this video, so please check it out. Fork my repository, or if you find my work to be useful, please start the repository, or you can buy me a coffee. There's a link there, so you can buy me a coffee to show your appreciation. Either way, that'll be good. And check out my repository. I repeat, it's Node TypeScript CRUD nodes. It's on GitHub. It's open source. If you like it, give it a star. If you feel there's something else I can add to it, please create an issue or leave a comment, or however you prefer. That's pretty much all, everyone, and this has been great, and I wish you all well. Live long and prosper, and happy Easter. Bye.